So I'm really excited to be back up here again today. But before we go forward, let's take a step backwards and talk about real quick recap of what I talked about last time I was up here, because I think it kind of sets the foundation for what we're going to talk about today. Last time I was here, we talked about Romans 12:1. We based our time on Romans 12:1. Michelle, could you pop that up on the screen? That's okay. So Romans 12:1, this is from the New Living Translation. And so, dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you to give your bodies to God because of all He has done for you. Let them be a living and holy sacrifice, the kind you will find acceptable. This is truly the way to worship Him. So we kind of laid out that case with 5 gifts from God that we said that He's given us that should cause us to have that kind of gratitude. We talked about creation, we talked about life, we talked about all of our stuff, we talked about our talents, and we talked about our purpose. And that God had given those 5 gifts to us, and He'd asked them to use them in service to the church. We talked about how God makes us on purpose and God makes us for purpose. We talked about Jesus' marching orders for the church. Pretty simple: to love God with all our hearts. Teens, we're talking about that in our class. We talked about to love others as we love ourselves. And of course, we talked about the Great Commission to go out into the world and make disciples. We kind of wrapped that up in a catchy little slogan: follow God, help people follow God. We also talked about some of the places where some churches struggle in the kind of marketplace of ideas today. And that one place is that a lot of churches, or a lot of people believe that we're known more for what we're against than what we're for. People think of what Christians are against and not what Christians are for. And that's a shame, because we have such an awesome message, such good news for the world. We also talked about how some churches tend to characterize Jesus as an escape route to heaven, rather than somebody who can help you get through your life today. And that there needs to be more focus on what Jesus can do for you today, rather than just being there for you in heaven, which is awesome. But He's here today too. So in short, we tried to build a case why Romans 12:1 should be put into action, why we should give ourselves our lives to God, and about how our role in this whole game is to use our circumstances to God's glory, and we call that case the compelling why. Now, 12:1 by itself is great. I like what we talked about last time, but it's a little bit incomplete. To really get the full picture, you got to roll forward one verse into Romans 12:2, and that is, don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. All right, how many of us have computers at work or at school? Pretty much everybody, I'm assuming, right? Computers at work. What do you do when your computer starts to lock up, run slow, generally dump out on you? It's up there on the screen, so you already have a hint. You reboot, right? You reboot. You hit Control, Alt, Delete, and you reboot. And I think that's exactly the kind of transformation that Romans 12:2 is trying to get at. That we need to give God the control. We need to give up control in our lives. We need to seek God for that alternate path to live our lives, and we need to allow God to delete the legacy of our past and allow us to move forward in the future. Now, I know that's a cheesy metaphor, Control, Alt, Delete. But, everybody is going to look at our keyboards tomorrow, next week, next month, and some of us are never going to look at our keyboards the same way again, and that's mission accomplished. So there's my cheesy metaphor for today. So Halloween. What better week to talk about transformation in the Bible than Halloween week, right? Halloween is a holiday completely dedicated to transformation. Cheap, superficial transformation, but transformation nonetheless, right? So a quick story from my freshman year in college. So Halloween rolled out my freshman year, and my suite mates and I, there were 6 of us total, we were thinking of what we could do to dress up for Halloween, and we decided that the idea we came up with was to make ourselves into a 6-pack. And before I go any further, let me remind you that I am old. So when we did this, making yourself into a 6-pack of beer was completely legal. We were of legal drinking age back then, so I'm not advocating doing anything illegal. So we said, okay, we're going to make ourselves into a 6-pack. We got cardboard tubes, kind of decorated them, strapped ourselves together. Pretty clever idea, right? Not so much. What we didn't really give a whole lot of thought to is that each of us was now strapped to 5 other dudes. So if you wanted to talk to anybody, dance with anybody, get through a doorway, that pretty much became impossible. So, I say that to say that is what my parents spent their hard-earned savings for. So anyhow, the 800-pound gorilla in the room in that verse, to me, is the word transformation. Right? Transformation. I think it's a little bit of a scary word. What does that mean? What does transformation mean? Do I have it? How do I know if I have it? I think for a lot of us, we tend to think of transformation as sort of a light switch. That we accept Christ, the switch gets flipped, and we never struggle with sin, we never struggle with faith, we never struggle with the spiritual disciplines. We're just like 0 to 60 in 3 seconds, and we're off and running. And alternatively, I think, at least for me, I'm talking, when I do continue to struggle with those things, when I have moments where I doubt faith, or I doubt my, the things that I know to be true, then I think, well, maybe I'm not transformed. And I think that that's inherently flawed thinking, but we're inherently flawed beings, so I guess it goes hand in hand. So we'll start with a Merriam-Webster dictionary definition of transformation. I'll read it right out here. It says, a complete or major change in something or someone's appearance, form, etc. Interesting. Sounds kind of like change on the outside, right? Not so much change on the inside. So where else would we go to look for change on the outside than pop culture? So go to TV. Most of us are probably old enough to have grown up with Superman on TV, right? The Superman that would jump into a phone booth and like 3 seconds later pop out of the phone booth in his full Superman outfit and his superhero outfit. And that's what we think transformation looks like. That Superman thing reminds me of another story, by the way. You guys know Chuck Norris jokes? There's hundreds of them out there, like, Chuck Norris counted to infinity twice, that kind of thing. One of my favorite Chuck Norris jokes is that Chuck Norris and Superman once had a bet over who was tougher, and the loser had to wear their underwear on the outside. So let's look at some more examples from TV. No better place to go than reality TV. Reality TV has infested every channel on our TV these days. You want to transform your car? There's shows like Overhaul and Pimp My Ride. They'll take your crummy car and they'll trick it out and you have it back in a couple of days and it'll improve your whole self-image. You want to transform your house? There's Extreme Home Makeover, and there's, well, pretty much every show on HGTV. They'll take your circumstance, they'll come in there a week later, next thing you know, you're feeling better about yourself because your house is transformed. You want to transform food? My wife and I watch the Food Channel a lot. They have Chopped, they have Iron Chef America. Those, again, are shows where they give the folks ingredients. Next thing you know, they have like this yummy meal that comes out of nowhere. Transformation is right there. You want to transform yourself? They have shows like What Not to Wear, where these two fashionistas, sorry I had to say that word, but these two fashionistas transform your wardrobe, and that transformed wardrobe allows you to transform yourself, right? So that, in my mind, the not so subtle message in all of those transformations is that transformation is pretty easy, and that transformation is pretty fast. But I think that actually, well, I know it's all wrong. I think God will tell you that that's all wrong. I think Romans 12:1 and 2 tells you it's all wrong. I think it's hard work. Now, the best analogy I've ever run across for what kind of hard work it is comes from Pastor Mark Driscoll out of Mars Hill in Seattle. And what he says is that Jesus repeatedly uses the imagery of marriage when he's talking about our relationship with God, that we're the bride of Christ. And he kind of takes that obvious metaphor, at least it should have been obvious, I think, to us, and he says that, the moment you come to Christ is the wedding, and the rest of your life with Christ is the marriage. And I think that's pretty easy for every married person in the room here to kind of get your head around, right? That it's not easy to be married. It's hard work, there's ups, there's downs, there's ebbs and flows. It's hard work to be married. Yeah, there was definitely immediate change on the day you got married. There was a ring where there wasn't one before, there was a new last name for the bride, there was a new living situation for the newly married couple. There was some transformation right away, but transformation is far from over on day one. It's a lifetime stuff, and it really takes a lifetime to get it right. In fact, I think Valerie would hope that I'm a cat because I think she thinks I'm on track for it to take about 9 lifetimes for me to get it right. Anyway, so it takes commitment, sacrifice. And along the lines of sacrifice, there's a book that's really popular right now by a guy named Malcolm Gladwell. It's called Outliers. Are you guys familiar with that book? It's really popular like in business circles and some other circles. He studied the habits of super successful people, the phenomenal people, people we know by one name. One-word names. And he looked at them and he decided that one of the characteristics that they all shared was they had invested about 10,000 hours, minimum of 10,000 hours to get to that point where they are, to get to that point of being super phenomenal. So Connor, this is for you. 10,000 hours. If you practice something for 45 minutes a day, every day, 365 days a year, Christmas, Easter, holidays, weekends, doesn't matter, 365 days a year, how long do you think it'll take you to get to 10,000 hours? That's okay. About 36 years. That's a long time. And I don't know about you guys, but for me, if I do something 45 minutes a day, every day, that's a pretty big commitment. So that kind of depressed me, right? To stop and think that if I do something that, what I consider to be quite a lot, it still takes 36 years. So I know you're an awesome guitarist, but it's not because you spend 45 minutes a day on it, right? You probably add a zero to that to get what you spend on the guitar. So, awesome job. So let's kind of turn to Scripture here and talk about a transformation story in Scripture, at least something that I see as a transformation story, and that's the story of Jesus and the Samaritan woman at the well. So it's in John 4, it's kind of verse 1 to 42, and we'll skip around just a little bit, but we'll pick up the story here in verse 3. And it says, "So he left Judea and returned to Galilee. He had to go through Samaria on the way." Let's take a time out. Not exactly. In that culture, I think a lot of folks know that Jews and Samaritans didn't really get along. And any Jew that would have been traveling from Judea to Galilee would have known full well that they didn't have to go through Samaria, that there was another way that the Jews had figured out to go. It was a little bit longer, a little bit of a detour, but he didn't have to go. So when Scripture is saying he had to go, it doesn't mean that there wasn't another route. It means that that was part of his plan, part of his destiny. He had to go because it was part of being God. So pick it up in verse 5. "Eventually he came to the Samaritan village of Sychar, near the field that Jacob gave his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired from the long walk, sat wearily beside the well about noontime. Soon a Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, 'Please give me a drink.'" So noontime, that's a significant part of the story. Noon was the heat of the day, and you didn't really find people going to the well at the heat of the day. The reason the lady was there at noon is specifically because she did not want to run into anybody from her village. She did not want to see anybody that she normally sees. She was hiding from her reputation. And Jesus knew that. So verse 8, he, Jesus, was alone at the time because his disciples had gone into the village to buy some food. The woman was surprised, for Jews refused to have anything to do with Samaritans. She said to Jesus, "You are a Jew, and I'm a Samaritan woman. Why are you asking me for a drink?" So she's confused and a little bit put off, right? For us, that'd be kind of like the Hatfield asking a McCoy for a cold one. It's not going to end well, right? So verse 10, Jesus replied, "If you only knew the gift God has for you and who you are speaking to, you would ask me, and I would give you living water. But sir, you don't have a rope or a bucket," she said, "and this well is very deep. Where would you get this living water? And besides, do you think you're greater than our ancestor Jacob, who gave us this well? How could you offer better water than he and his sons and animals enjoyed?" She's calling him out. She's saying, "Who do you think you are?" She's not really taking him seriously. She's like, "Well, you brought a magic bucket, amigo." So for verse 13, Jesus replied, "Anyone who drinks this water will soon become thirsty again. But those who drink the water I give will never be thirsty again. It becomes a fresh, bubbling spring within them, giving them eternal life." "Please, sir," the woman said, "give me this water. Then I'll never be thirsty again, and I won't have to come here to get water." I think at this point she's probably thinking, "Sweet, if I can get some of this water, I never come back here again. I don't have to come in the heat of the day. I don't have to come when everybody else is here. I'm in good shape." So she's starting to get it, but I think Jesus has to challenge her a little bit more first. So verse 16, he says, "Go and get your husband," Jesus told her. That's awesome. Jesus knows full well what the answer to that question is, and he's not afraid to make her squirm a little bit, as we see in verse 17. "I don't have a husband," the woman replied. Jesus said, "You're right, you don't have a husband, for you have had 5 husbands, and you aren't even married to the man you're living with now. You certainly speak the truth." Ouch. Verse 19, "Sir," the woman said, "you must be a prophet. So tell me, why is it the Jews insist that Jerusalem is the only place of worship, while we Samaritans claim that it's here at Mount Gerizim where our ancestors worshipped?" So now she's giving it right back to him. She's sparring with the Lord of all creation. I think Jews would have called that chutzpah. So verse 21, Jesus replied, "Believe me, dear woman," I think there's probably a little anger at that point. Get this right. "The time is coming when it will no longer matter whether you worship the Father on this mountain or in Jerusalem. You Samaritans know very little about the one you worship, while we Jews know all about him. For salvation comes through the Jews. But the time is coming indeed, it's here now, when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. The Father is looking for those who will worship him in that way. For God is spirit, so those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth." This is big. Jesus makes it clear that it's not going to be about what you call yourself, or what you look like, or what you do on the outside. That it's all about who you are on the inside. It's about abandoning empty religion and showy religion on the outside in favor of Jesus' living water. It's transformation from the inside out, and it's Romans 12:2. Verse 25. The woman said, I know the Messiah is coming, the one who's called Christ. When he comes, he'll explain everything to us. Then Jesus told her, I am the Messiah. Just then his disciples came back. They were shocked to find him talking to a woman, but none of them ever had the nerve to ask, what do you want with her? Why are you talking to her? I love these guys. Throughout Scripture, they're always dumbfounded. So verse 28. The woman left her water jar beside the well and ran back to the village, telling everyone, come and see, a man who told me everything I ever did. Could he possibly be the Messiah? So the people came streaming in from the village to see him. How about that for personal transformation? 5 minutes ago, she's coming to the well at noon, specifically because she does not want to run into anybody from her village. And now she runs back to the village and she starts witnessing to the exact people she was trying to avoid. That's pretty awesome. So verse 39. Many Samaritans from the village believed in Jesus because the woman had said, he told me everything I ever did. When they came out to see him, they begged him to stay in their village, so he stayed for 2 days, long enough for many more to hear his message and believe. Then they said to the woman, now we believe, not just because of what you told us, but because we have heard him ourselves, and we now know that he is indeed the Savior of the world. So the woman goes to the well to get something she believes she needs, water. And Jesus gives her something she needs much, much more, living water. Now 2,000 years later, I don't think we're really a whole lot different than that. We go to the well every day looking to get the things we need, looking to find the things we need in our lives. Now, I think most of us probably like a good do-it-yourself project, right? Go to Home Depot, go to Lowe's, get the stuff we need, and that's great. I think that works out great for building a deck on your house, or maybe putting in a new exhaust system on your car. But I don't. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it doesn't work out so good. But I think where it doesn't work is with matters of faith, and I think that's exactly what Romans 12:2 is trying to say. It doesn't say go ahead and grab your paint bucket and your hammer and try to transform yourself. It says let God do the transforming for you. But the DIY approach, I think, is what all of us do. It's what the Samaritan woman did. It's what we do today. So let's take a look at 4 wells, we'll call them, that I think we run to try to get DIY help for ourselves. We'll call the first well the well of me. And the well of me is, if I can improve me, if I can create a better version of me, then I'll be happy. And if I'm happy, then I can grow closer to God. Now go to any bookstore, to the extent those still exist, and one of the biggest sections you'll find in that bookstore is the self-help section. So we all love that kind of the DIY self-help to try to make ourselves better people. The current is too fat, it's too skinny, it has too much hair, it doesn't have enough hair, it has nothing to wear, it doesn't have anything to wear, it's not smart enough, it's too nerdy, it's whatever. The point is that I don't like the me that I see in the mirror, and I feel like I can create a new me. It's up to me, it's with my control to go create a new me, and then I'll be happy. I believe that King Solomon, who's the wisest man in the world according to the Bible, would have called that chasing the wind. And if you think that's interesting, go read the book of Ecclesiastes. It's a short book, easy to read, and it'll give you it's chock a block full of wisdom along those lines. So the second well that we would run to, I'd call the well of religion. And it's really not that much different from the well of me. What that is it says, well, if I surround myself with a little bit of religion, a little bit of ritual and stuff, then I can create that better version of me. The way I look at it is if I can get a set of rules and structure and some standards to measure myself, and I can start beating somebody, then I can figure, hey, I must be better than somebody, therefore I must be okay, therefore it's a better version of me, I can grow closer to God, and everybody's happy. But see, the problem with that is that that's exactly what the Pharisees were doing in the Bible. They knew how to create the right public impression, they knew how to pray out loud, how to wear the right things, how to look all pious and holy, and that's why Jesus was mad at them all the time. In Luke chapter 11, he really dresses them down, telling them that you're so careful to clean the outside of the cup and the dish, but on the inside you're still filthy. And that's pretty much a straightforward double-barrel dig at empty religion and living by rules and rituals and not living by the Spirit. That does you no good. And honestly, when I look at a lot of Christian churches around the world today, around the country today, I see just that kind of thing. I see a lot of people in pews all over the place figuring that if they surround themselves with a few God things on the outside, that will somehow create a few good things on the inside. And I think the well of religion is another empty well, and it's chasing the wind in the same way as the well of me was an empty well. Really, the well of religion is nothing more than the well of me with the Bible tucked under one arm. So next will is the will of you. So sometimes when we get a little tired of trying to improve ourselves, we kind of turn the magnifying glass around and start to look for the speck in everyone else's eye, the way Jesus famously said it. So we'll figure the thought process goes like this. If I can create a better version of fill in the blank, whoever that is, then they'll stop bothering me so much. And if they stop bothering me so much, then I'll be happier, and if I'm happier, then I can grow closer to God. That's how that whole thing plays out. Again, I think that is chasing the wind, and that it's an empty well. We believe that if we fix the people we're surrounded by, that somehow we can create a better version of me, and that a better version of me is the answer that I'm looking for. Empty well. And the last empty well is my personal favorite. I call it the well of stealth. I like cars. A lot of you know that. I love cars. I can always tell you, and always includes yesterday, I can tell you why a new car will solve all of my problems, if not downright transform my life. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but I'm saying that's the way I'm wired. This drives my wife nuts. Now, it might not be cars for you. It could be your job or your house. Could be that a bigger house will make you feel like the person you've always wanted to be. It could be that promotion will make you feel like the person you've always wanted to be. It could be sports or hobbies or gardening. It could be any distraction that causes you to worry more about your treasures on earth than your treasures in heaven. Any distraction is another empty well, and it's again chasing the wind. Now, don't get me wrong. There's positive lifestyle changes that we can all make, and I'm not trying to argue against them. But I think when it comes to DIY transformation, there's two massive problems. So problem number one, I think, is the Bible. Romans 12:2 doesn't call us to change the way we act, it causes us to change the way we think. And that's a subtle but important difference. I think a change in action can sometimes be a kind of a superficial and temporary change, but a change in the way we think and the way we make decisions is a change that I think is more likely to be a lasting change. And I think you could argue that transformation of thought, that the end product of transformation of thought is actually transformation of action. Now, have you guys ever heard of, I got it here somewhere, a little book by C.S. Lewis called The Screwtape Letters? Is that familiar? It's a great book. I highly recommend it to everybody. In fact, I'm heartbroken that O isn't here today, because I think this is exactly his kind of book, so I'll have to hit him over the head with it next week. But so what this book is, it's, as the title implies, it's a series of letters. And they're letters between two demons or devils. One is kind of the boss, and his name is Uncle Screwtape, and he's writing letters back and forth. Well, really, the letters are all from Uncle Screwtape, based on letters that you don't hear from his apprentice, Wormwood. And Wormwood is down here on Earth trying to weave evil into the life of a just average Joe that they call the patient. So it's an interesting read. It takes a little getting used to. They call Satan our father below, and they call God the enemy. So you kind of got to get your head around the sort of landscape that's going on there. But it's a dark comedy, but I think it's loaded with good theology. And one of the things that Uncle Screwtape says that I think is really relevant to what we're talking about here is he's talking about the patient. And he says, the more often he feels without acting, the less he will ever be able to act. And in the long run, the less he will ever be able to feel. To say that another way, if we don't act on our feelings, the feelings will die. To me, that's James 2:17, faith without works are dead. That if we don't act on our faith will die. I think that's what C.S. Lewis was saying, and I think that's what you get when you try to transform yourself and not rely on God to transform you. Speaking of which, that's problem number two. Problem number two, where if self-help were capable of creating the lasting, meaningful biblical transformation that we're after, then we really wouldn't need God. We wouldn't need Jesus. All we need is some kind of DIY manual, and we'd take care of it ourselves. But that's not the case. God tells us that He came into our broken and dying world. In fact, would you even still call it a dying world if we could fix it ourselves? Really not a dying world at that point, right? One of my favorite pastors, aside from Joe, Lon Solomon from McLean Bible Church, has a saying that I just love. He says, Jesus didn't come to make bad men good or good men better. Jesus came to make dead men alive. When death came into the world in Genesis chapter 3, it wasn't just a physical death. It was a spiritual death as well. When we were cast out of the garden, we became spiritually dead. Dead on the inside. And that's why Jesus says he came to bring us living water, to fill us with his living water. Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Picture of him. Probably most of you have never heard of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I was telling Joe, I was a little disappointed. This gentleman was a Lutheran pastor in Germany during World War II. My dad grew up a Lutheran in Germany during World War II, and I asked him yesterday what he thought of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He'd never heard of him, so that was a disappointment. But anyway, I assure you, Dietrich Bonhoeffer is famous in many circles. So, he's known for a couple of different things. He's known for some of his theological writings, including a book called The Cost of Discipleship, which is still a gold standard for a lot of people. We'll talk a little bit about something in that book later. He's known for his outspoken support of the Jews during World War II, which got him in trouble in Germany. He's known for his outspoken criticism of the establishment church in Germany during World War II, which got him in more trouble. And then he's known for participating in the Valkyrie plot to assassinate Hitler. And yeah, that's the Valkyrie with Tom Cruise, the big movie a couple of years ago. So he took part in that too. That last one is the one that led to his execution in a Nazi concentration camp at the age of 39, just 3 weeks before the end of World War II. So Bonhoeffer decided early in his life, kind of to his dad's dismay, that he wanted to be a Lutheran pastor. And he decided to go to seminary, but when he graduated from seminary, he was still several years too young to have an active church in Germany. So he decided to go across the pond to come here and go to more seminary education. He went to Union Theological Seminary in New York. And in addition to learning at Union, one of the things he did regularly was he would go to Harlem and he would go worship with the African American congregations there. And he credits that with changing the way he thinks about faith. That he saw kind of faith there in a kind of charismatic, exuberant sort of way that he didn't see in the congregations in Germany. And it gave him a lot more sympathy for diversity, and that's one of the things that led to his support for the Jews in the war. That it's not just about people that are just like me, it's about people that aren't like me too. One thing that a lot of people don't know about him is that just before World War II, on the advice of some friends, he had made a decision for his own personal safety to go back across the pond from Germany back to the US and wait out what he thought was going to be a war there, to try to stay safe from the war. And he did that. He floated over. It takes a few weeks, I think. He got here and immediately started feeling that call on his life that he was in the wrong place. And then within 26 days, he boarded a boat back over to Germany, because he felt that that was where he was supposed to be. That he felt that that was where the good fight was to be fought. Now he knew full well that that was a decision that might cost him his life. And it did. He carried his cross. He picked up his cross and he carried it. He carried it all the way to a concentration camp where he was hung and his body dumped in a heap, along with the bodies of people that he was called to protect. That's the transformation story right there. On the theological side, perhaps his best-known contribution is his cheap grace and its corollary costly grace. I know this sounds a little pie in the sky, but believe me, it's worth it. So I'm going to read you real quick here what he says cheap grace is. I'll read it in his own words. Cheap grace is justification of the sin without justification of the sinner. Grace alone does everything, so everything can remain as it was before. Let the Christian live like the rest of the world. Let him model himself on the world's standards in every sphere of life, and not presumptuously aspire to live a different life under grace from his old life under sin. Cheap grace is grace without discipleship. It's grace without the cross. It's grace without Jesus Christ living and incarnate. Cheap grace is the grace we bestow on ourselves. It's like he wrote that in response to Romans 12:2. Romans 12:2 teaches us not to be conformed to the behavior and customs of this world, and not to try to transform ourselves. Cheap grace is us trying to transform ourselves. Well, it's not even trying to transform. It's us being okay with the customs and the patterns of this world. The corollary to cheap grace is what he calls costly grace. Costly grace is the gospel which must be sought again and again, the gift which must be asked for, the door at which a man must knock. Such grace is costly because it calls us to follow, and it is grace because it calls us to follow Jesus Christ. It is costly because it cost a man his life. And it is grace because it gives a man his only true life. It is costly because it condemns sin. It is grace because it justifies the sinner. Above all, it's costly because it cost God the life of his Son. And it is grace because God did not reckon his Son too dear a price to pay for our life, but delivered him up for us. Costly grace is the incarnation of God. Wow. So it's costly because God gave up his Son, and it's grace because he did it for us. That's incredibly powerful, and to me that has Romans 12:1 written all over it. That offering yourself as a living sacrifice to God. That's what costly grace is. Now, I'm not advocating, and I don't think Bonhoeffer is, that we're saved by works. I believe that we're saved by faith. I think he did. But what I am saying is that offering ourselves as that sacrifice is what Romans 12:1 asks us to do. It costs us everything, but it gives us everything in return. All right, every time one of those church surveys comes out in the last few years, you get this graph, and it shows church attendance, especially in the Christian church in America, going. You see this graph, right, the last 10 years. And if you look a little bit behind the numbers there, what you see is the attendance is declining the steepest among what they call your mainline denominations. That's Methodists, Lutherans, Episcopalians, Presbyterians, that kind of thing. And when you look a little bit at what those churches believe, at least on the national level, I'm sure there's individual churches that are much different, but at least on the national level, those are the churches that have embraced the idea that God's happy if you're happy. That if there really are no rules, it's whatever makes you happy. And those churches are the ones that have embraced the idea, or really I should say fallen away from the idea of heaven and hell. Most of those churches will tell you, at least officially, that we're not really sure if there is a heaven and a hell. We're pretty sure there's a heaven, and everybody probably knows that. That's exactly what those churches tell you, but yet, those are the ones going like this. By contrast, you look at some of the churches that I tend to follow. There's Mars Hill out in Seattle that I mentioned. There's the Village Church in Dallas. It's a guy named Matt Chandler. There's Watermark, also in Dallas, Todd Wagner. All three of these guys preach a very challenging gospel. They're out there with their hair on fire, yelling about sin and the consequences of sin and the need for salvation in our lives. They water down nothing. And yet all three of these guys, and others like them, in that same period of time where the overall church has been going like this, their individual churches have gone from a few hundred to 10, 15, 20,000 weekly worshipers. And the reason I think that is I think that has everything to do with authenticity. That's a word I hear a lot in the world these days. I think that the world around us, people around us, they know the book. They know a lot more than we think they do about the book, about our gospel. And I think when they see us preaching things that they know run contrary to what's in our gospel, it makes us look inauthentic. It makes us look like liars. And I do not think that it draws them in. I think the folks that take a stand for the gospel have a much more compelling, authentic message. Everywhere you go, you hear, keep it real, man, keep it real. Those guys are keeping it real. They're keeping the focus on Jesus. And I think that that's really what people crave. If I can leave you guys with just one thought today, it's if our gospel looks no different than the rest of the world, why would the rest of the world need our gospel? Why would they want it? Right? If there's no eternal consequence to not believing, they'll go to heaven anyway. And there's no immediate consequence to not believing, because God's all good with whatever I do, why would I bother? And I think that's funny, because the most forward-thinking churches in our country are the ones that have embraced that gospel, the gospel of cheap grace. And they look at each other and they're surprised when their membership is doing this year after year. Why would anyone bother being a part of that? So when I planned on coming up here again, I knew obviously right away that I wanted to talk about Romans 12:2, so I thought 12:1 was kind of incomplete without 12:2. And I knew right away that I wanted to talk about the story of the woman at the well. And I'd been reading another book, a kind of compilation of biographies that had Dietrich Bonhoeffer in there, so it didn't take long to figure out that I wanted to talk about him. But what I was lacking, what I really wanted, was kind of a Law and Order ripped from the headlines kind of story, something that would illustrate this at work in the world today. So I was driving to work one day this week, and I was flipping channels looking for music, and I flipped on Hot 99.5, a pop radio station, and I just heard the absolute tail end. I'm sorry, I was listening to pop music, Connor. I just heard the very tail end of a kind of Good Samaritan story that apparently had gone viral on the internet. So I got to work and I checked it out. I found it at all places on the Huffington Post. So I'm going to read it to you as it is out of the Huffington Post. Jessica Eves was shopping in Guthrie, Oklahoma earlier this month when her wallet was pinched. She spotted a man she suspected of taking it in a nearby aisle and wondered what to do next. As I saw him, a scripture came to me from Luke, which basically says, if someone should take your cloak, you should give him your shirt as well. The passage inspired her next actions as she approached the man and calmly said, I think you have something of mine, and I'm going to give you a choice. You can either give me my wallet, and I can forgive you now, and, pay attention, and I'll even take you to the front and pay for your groceries. Or I can call the police. She said he started crying as they walked to the front of the store, and he kept apologizing and saying that he was embarrassed. Eves, a mother of 4 and leader of the Christian outreach team at First Christian Church in Guthrie, responded that she makes mistakes every day and has just as much to be embarrassed about, as she believes that in the eyes of Jesus, no one sin is greater than another. Listen to this part. She paid $27 for his groceries, which was almost all the money she had in her purse. I never carried cash. When I got to the checkout counter that day, the robber's, total was a little over $27, and I had $28 in my wallet. I knew at that moment that it wasn't me. It was Christ playing in that moment. Teens, that's one of those God moments we were talking about last week. God intervened in that moment, and he gave her a chance to conform to the patterns of this world and to be out for justice and vengeance in her pound of flesh, to get back at the guy who stole her wallet, or she could choose to act the way God had instructed us to act. And she made an amazing decision, didn't she? I'd love to be able to tell you that I would have made the same decision if I were faced with that exact set of circumstances. I hope I would, but I don't know that I would. So I'm awestruck by what this lady did. There's another thought for you. God is not interested in being at the top of our priority list. I'll say that one more time. God is not interested in being at the top of our priority list. And I'll tell you why. The thing about a priority list is that every priority exists in a vacuum. And the thing about a priority list is that I'm in control. It's my list. I set the order. I can move around priorities as I see fit, depending on my circumstances in the day. And most importantly, when I complete a task on my list, I can check that task off and I don't have to refer back to it again. It's done and I can move on to the next task. I don't think God is interested in being checked off of our list of things to do. I believe that a transformed life infuses him into every item on our to-do list. He wants to be at the center of our lives. Just the way the earth orbits around the sun, S-U-N, I think our lives should orbit around the sun as well, S-O-N. A transformed life recognizes that I can't do it by myself. A transformed life recognizes that every breath we take and every decision we make, by the way, version 1 of that, and every breath we take and every move we make, but then I figured we'd be humming the police for the rest of the time, that seemed like it was a mistake. So every decision we make is in response to his grace. A transformed life offers itself as a living sacrifice, Romans 12:1 style. Sorry, Schwarz is doing it.
I told you, brother.
I would lock this down in 5 minutes. All right, so what does this mean for the church? I promised myself I wouldn't look at my watch. But, all right, what does this mean for the church? I think a lot about the church, and sometimes that's Little C Church Hair Connection, sometimes that's Big C Church, Church Universal. And for the Little C, here's what I think it means. It means that I sit around, and I think a lot of us sit around saying, what can we do different? What can we do better? What can we do more of? What can we do less of? What can we do? What can we not do? Do we need space? Do we need this? Do we need that? What do we need to do? And I think all of those things have DIY written all over them. So I'm going to suggest a different strategy. There was a book that came out 10, 12 years ago called The Prayer of Jabez. I don't know if you guys remember it. Bruce Wilkinson wrote it. It's a huge, big deal. It kind of went a little prosperity gospel for my personal taste. But the idea was there's this guy that's mentioned in like 3 sentences in 1 Chronicles, Jabez. He prays out to God. He says, "Oh, that you would bless me and enlarge my territory. Let your hand be with me and keep me from the evil one." Scripture records that God granted his request. So Bruce Wilkinson kind of wrote this book saying, if you pray that prayer of Jabez to enlarge my territory, God's going to do that for you. And again, I think that's a little prosperity, but I think there's an application there for us here at the church. So I'm going to challenge everybody here that calls themselves Connection their weekly home. I'm going to challenge us to pray for 30 days, starting today, and we'll pray at the end of this. Starting today, pray for 30 days, that little prayer of Jabez for our church. Pray that God would enlarge our territory, that he would bring us more disciples, that he would expand our reach in the community. Not for our sake, but for his sake. So let's do that. And lastly, for the church Big C, we've talked about this a little bit already, but what does that mean for the big body of Christ in the world? I think it means we need to move past empty religion. Real, authentic Christianity is not really a religion. It's more than a religion. It's a rescue mission. Jesus came to save us. He came to rescue us. And our job is to pay it forward. Our mission, our great co-mission, is to pay it forward and go out into the world and make more disciples in the name of and through the power of Jesus. We need to lay down some of our rituals and denominations and doctrines, not all of them. A lot of them are perfectly valid, non-negotiable. We'll talk about that another time. But we need to focus on what it means to be disciples of Christ. What we're talking about is the same thing that Jesus talked about with the Samaritan woman. It's not how you look on the outside, it's how you worship on the inside. So we'll say it a little bit differently. Love God, help people love God. Craig Rochelle, a megachurch pastor out in Oklahoma, asks the question this way. He says, does your heart break for the things that break the heart of God? That's a great question. If we truly believe that God is at the center of our lives and other people are at the center of God's life, our hearts should break for the things that break the heart of God. I'll leave you with a quote here. Almost done. I'll leave you with a quote from a guy named Martin Niemöller, who was one of Bonhoeffer's closest friends. He talked about this when talking about resisting the Nazis during World War II. First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. Folks, if there's anybody here today that hasn't committed their life to Christ, now's a perfectly good time to do that. And I'll leave you with this sobering thought. That God promises us an abundant life, he promises us forgiveness, he promises us an eternity in glory. But I'll tell you what he does not promise us, and that is tomorrow. God does not promise us tomorrow. If your hang up is the hypocritical church people, get in line. Get in line behind Jesus. He didn't much care for them either. If you don't think you're good enough, if you don't think you're smart enough, if you don't think you've got it together, get in line behind me. I mean, like I said, I wish if I were faced with that decision Jessica Eves made, I'd have made the same one, but I don't know. I honestly don't know. Folks, every road has a destination, and we're all on a road that leads somewhere. And it's God's desire that that road leads to an eternity spent in glory. And I think we take that mission seriously here at the church. And if you're having any interest in making that commitment today, after service, come see Joe, come see me. We won't give you judgment, we won't give you condemnation, we'll give you sympathetic ears and caring hearts. We just want to see that everybody grow in their relationship, to make that decision, to start that, to have that wedding and start that marriage that I talked about earlier. That's our prayer for you. And let's just close this thing down in prayer.